"What is this? Bring your grandpa to work day," a young cadet sneered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous marble hallway of the Hart Senate office building. Two of his classmates snickered, their freshly pressed uniforms looking stiff and out of place against the historic grandeur. Wayne Jenkins, 78 years old, continued his work, the rhythmic sweep of his push broom a steady, calming sound against the polished floor. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He had heard voices like that before, in places far more dangerous than this. The lead cadet, a boy named Peterson with a jaw that jutted out further than his understanding, stepped directly in front of the broom. "Hey, I'm talking to you, old man. You deaf?" Wayne stopped his sweeping. He slowly raised his eyes, his gaze calm, his hands steady on the long wooden handle. They were just boys. Boys playing at being men, drowning in the arrogance of their youth and the crispness of their new uniforms. They saw a stooped janitor, a relic of a bygone era, invisible. They had no idea who they were looking at. The confrontation, a small seed of insolence, began to sprout in the sterile, echoing corridor. Peterson, emboldened by his friend's snickers and Wayne's silence, pushed the act. "You know you're supposed to show respect to the uniform, Pops. We're future officers. You should probably stand up a little straighter when we talk to you." He puffed out his chest, a caricature of the authority he so desperately wanted. Wayne's posture didn't change. His spine, though curved by age, was straighter than any of theirs would ever be. He had stood straight while friends fell around him in the Iadrang Valley. He had stood straight while carrying the weight of a nation's conflicted heart on his shoulders. He would not straighten for this boy. "I'm just doing my job, son," Wayne said, his voice a low gravel, steady and calm. "Trying to keep the place clean." The simplicity of the answer seemed to enrage Peterson more than any retort could have. It was a dismissal, a quiet refusal to engage in the boy's petty power play. "Your job," Peterson scoffed, kicking the pile of dust Wayne had meticulously gathered, scattering it across the gleaming floor. "Your job is to be invisible, to get out of the way when your betters are walking through." His friends laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the otherwise quiet hall. A few staffers hurried past, their eyes averted, their pace quickening. They saw the confrontation, the trio of arrogant cadets cornering the old janitor. They felt a pang of discomfort, a flicker of outrage, but the current of their busy lives pulled them onward. It wasn't their business. Intervening was a risk, a potential complication in a world that rewarded smooth sailing. So they walked on, leaving Wayne isolated in a bubble of youthful contempt. "Look at this guy," the second cadet chimed in, pointing a finger at the collar of Wayne's gray work shirt. "Probably never did a single thing for his country, just shuffling a broom his whole life." Wayne's gaze remained fixed on Peterson, ignoring the other boy entirely. It was a technique learned long ago. Focus on the threat, ignore the noise. The noise can't kill you, but the threat can. He adjusted his grip on the broom handle. The wood was smooth and familiar under his calloused palms, worn from years of use. It felt solid, real, a tangible thing in a world that was becoming increasingly surreal. "You boys have a class to get to?" Wayne asked, his tone even, betraying no anger. He was just a man trying to do his job. The more he refused to give them the reaction they craved, the more their frustration grew. It was like punching water. His calm was a mirror, reflecting their own immaturity back at them. Peterson's face reddened. He wasn't used to being handled. He was used to deference, to the automatic respect his uniform was supposed to command. He saw the janitor not as a person but as an obstacle to his own self-importance. "We'll leave when we're done," he said, stepping closer, invading Wayne's personal space. The scent of cheap cologne and youthful sweat filled the air. "Maybe we should teach you a lesson about respect. Maybe you need a reminder of who's in charge here." The air crackled with a tension only Wayne seemed fully equipped to handle. The boys were escalating, their words turning into veiled threats, their posturing becoming more aggressive. They were children throwing a tantrum, but they were children in the bodies of men, and that made them dangerous. Wayne simply held his ground, his silence a shield, his calm a weapon they had no defense against. The scene was a slow-motion car crash, an injustice unfolding one cruel word at a time on the cold, indifferent marble. A flash, hot and sudden, blindsided Wayne. It wasn't the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hallway, but the blistering, unforgiving sun of a Vietnamese jungle. The mocking voice of the cadet faded, replaced by the rhythmic thwump 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 of Huey helicopter blades beating the thick, humid air into submission. For a split second, the polished marble floor became a muddy LZ, the sterile air thick with the smell of cordite, jet fuel and fear. On his work shirt just above the pocket was a small, faded pin. It was a simple silver star, its points dulled by time, almost invisible against the gray fabric. One of the cadets had gestured at it mockingly. "What's that, your perfect attendance award?" The boy's laugh was sharp, but Wayne didn't hear it. He saw another hand, young and strong, pinning an identical star onto his fatigues. He saw the face of Sergeant Miller, 19 years old and impossibly old at the same time, grinning at him before they boarded the chopper for the assault on Hill 937. "For luck, Jenkins," Miller had said, his voice barely audible over the rotor wash. "So you remember how to get back." The memory was a ghost, a fleeting echo that lasted no more than a heartbeat, but it solidified something in Wayne. The broom in his hands felt less like a tool and more like the stock of his M16. His posture ever so slightly shifted. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a man who remembered how to get back. From a side corridor, hidden from the cadet's view, a young legislative aide named Sarah had stopped. She was on her way to deliver a stack of documents, a task of mundane importance, when the raised, arrogant voices had caught her ear. She saw the three cadets, their backs to her, looming over the old janitor. She recognized him instantly. It was Wayne, the man who always had a quiet good morning for everyone, the one who hummed old tunes while he worked, a fixture of the building as solid and dependable as the marble columns. Her first instinct was to walk away, just like everyone else. She was an intern, a bottom-rung player in a high-stakes game. Confronting cadets from a prestigious academy was not in her job description. It was a career risk. They could have connections. A complaint, a whispered word in the right ear, could derail her ambitions before they even left the station. She hesitated, her shoes frozen to the floor. Then Peterson kicked Wayne's dust pile. It was such a small, petty act of cruelty, but it broke through Sarah's hesitation. It was wrong. It was a simple, unambiguous wrong. Her grandfather had served in Korea. He was a quiet man, much like Wayne, who carried his stories deep inside him. She saw her grandfather in Wayne's place, and the thought filled her with a hot, protective anger. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She wouldn't confront them directly, that would be foolish. But she wouldn't walk away either. She knew who she had to call. She ducked into a small alcove, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, past senators and chiefs of staff, looking for a specific extension. It was a long shot. He was one of the most powerful and perpetually busy men in the entire military command structure, with an office on the top floor. He probably wouldn't even take her call. She found the number for the executive assistant of Colonel Marcus Thorne. She took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Colonel Thorne's office. A crisp voice answered. Sarah's voice was a nervous whisper. "My name is Sarah. I'm an aide in Senator Bradley's office. It's an emergency." There was a skeptical pause on the other end. "The colonel is in a meeting. Can I take a message?" "No," Sarah insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "You don't understand. There are some cadets harassing one of the janitors down in the main hall, a man named Wayne Jenkins." She said the name, and the entire atmosphere of the call shifted. There was another pause, but this one was different. It wasn't dismissive. It was sharp, attentive. "What was the name again?" "Wayne Jenkins," Sarah repeated. "They're being awful to him. Please, I think the colonel would want to know." The line went quiet for a moment. Sarah could hear muffled, urgent words in the background. Then the crisp voice was back, all traces of skepticism gone, replaced by a steely efficiency. "The colonel is on his way." Colonel Marcus Thorne sat at his sprawling mahogany desk, the seal of the United States Army embedded in the wood, staring at a satellite map of a volatile border region. His brow was furrowed in concentration. When his aide buzzed in, he waved her off without looking up. "Not now, Lieutenant." "Sir," the aide's voice cut through his focus, laced with an uncharacteristic urgency. "It's about a man, a Mr. Wayne Jenkins." The name hung in the air. Colonel Thorne went still. His head snapped up, the satellite map completely forgotten. His eyes, which a moment ago were scrutinizing troop movements halfway across the world, were now laser-focused on his aide. "What about him?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "There's a situation in the main lobby, sir. An aide from Senator Bradley's office just called. She said some West Point cadets are harassing him." Thorne was out of his chair before the lieutenant had finished the sentence. The transformation was breathtaking. The contemplative strategist vanished, replaced by a field commander. He grabbed the uniform jacket hanging on the back of his chair, his movements economical and precise. "Get me General Casey's office on the line. Now," he commanded as he strode towards the door. "Tell him I have a code eagle, and get a security detail to the main hall. No sirens, just move." "A code eagle, sir," the lieutenant stammered, scrambling to keep up. It was a designation reserved for incidents involving the nation's most revered and decorated living heroes, a designation that hadn't been used in over a decade. "You heard me, Lieutenant," Thorne said, not breaking stride. "Move." The aide fumbled for his phone, his mind racing. Wayne Jenkins. He had heard the name whispered in the halls of the Pentagon, a legendary figure from a war most of his generation only knew from books. He thought it was just a story. In his office, Colonel Thorne, a man who commanded thousands, a man who briefed presidents, was moving with the coiled energy of a predator, all for a janitor in the lobby. Downstairs, Peterson felt he was winning. The old man's silence was, in his mind, submission. He was in control. It was time to end the game. "You know, insubordination is a serious offense," Peterson said, his voice dripping with mock authority. "Even for a civilian employee in a federal building, we could have you fired. Or better yet," he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we could recommend you for a psychological evaluation." An old man, acting confused, being belligerent. Who are they going to believe? The other two cadets shifted their weight. This was going further than they had intended. It had been a joke, a way to pass the time, but Peterson was pushing it into something ugly. The threat of a forced evaluation, of stripping the old man of his dignity and his job, hung in the air. It was a final, cruel overreach, a move designed not just to humiliate but to destroy. Wayne finally looked away from Peterson. His eyes scanned the length of the long hall. He wasn't looking for help. He was assessing, the way a soldier assesses the terrain, noting the exits, the obstacles, the lines of sight. He had faced down much worse than three boys playing dress-up. He had faced down death itself, in the shadowed jungles of a forgotten war. He would not break. There was no siren, no shouting, just a sudden palpable shift in the atmosphere of the hallway. It began with a sound, the rhythmic, authoritative click of hard-soled dress shoes on marble, approaching at a pace that was not hurried but unstoppable. The sound cut through the cadets' laughter and the ambient hum of the building. Heads began to turn. The staffers who had previously hurried past now slowed. Their curiosity piqued. The trio of cadets fell silent, turning towards the sound. Striding down the center of the hall was a full colonel, his uniform immaculate, his chest a constellation of ribbons and medals. He was flanked by two members of a security detail, but they were almost an afterthought. The colonel's presence alone was an overwhelming force. He was a man who radiated command, whose very posture demanded respect. His eyes were like chips of ice, and they were locked on the scene with an intensity that made the air feel thin. The cadets, who had been preening and posturing just seconds before, instinctively straightened their backs, their bravado evaporating like mist. They snapped to a rigid, if somewhat clumsy, state of attention. The balance of power in the hallway had just been inverted, completely and irrevocably. The colonel didn't even glance at the cadets. His eyes were fixed on the old janitor. He came to a halt a few feet away, his boots clicking sharply on the floor. The entire hallway held its breath. Sarah, the aide, watched from the alcove, her hand over her mouth. The colonel's posture was ramrod straight, a living embodiment of the military discipline the cadets had been trying to imitate. Then, in a voice that was not a shout but carried the force of a cannon blast, a voice honed by years of command in the field, he barked a single word: "Airborne." The word echoed off the marble walls. The cadets stared in blank confusion. It was a term they knew from history books, a relic of a different era, a different army. It meant nothing to them, but it meant everything to Wayne Jenkins. The effect of that single word was instantaneous and miraculous. The stooped, tired old man was gone. In his place stood a soldier. His back straightened with a snap, his shoulders squared, his chin came up. The years seemed to fall away from him, his eyes clearing, burning with a fire that had been banked for decades. He dropped the broom. It clattered to the floor, forgotten. His body, old and worn, locked into a perfect textbook straight position of attention. And from his lips, in a voice that was rough and rusty but utterly firm, came the reply, roared with a lifetime of conviction. "All the way." Colonel Thorne's hand snapped up in a salute so sharp, so precise it could have cut glass. He held it, his gaze locked on Wayne, a silent testament of respect passing between two warriors. The cadets were frozen in stunned disbelief. They were watching a ritual they didn't understand, a sacred call and response from a brotherhood they had not yet earned the right to join. The colonel slowly lowered his hand and finally turned his icy gaze upon the three boys. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The cadets were speechless, their faces pale. "You are standing in the presence of Sergeant Major Wayne Jenkins," the colonel announced, his voice now rising to fill the hall. "A prosecutor listing the charges against an unseen enemy." This man is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. He has 3 silver stars for gallantry in action, 4 bronze stars for valor, 5 purple hearts. With each medal he named, the crowd of onlookers, which had grown considerably, let out a collective gasp. This man, the colonel continued, his voice shaking with a controlled fury, led the forlorn hope charge at the Battle of Hamburger Hill after his entire command staff was killed. He held the line for 72 hours, alone, against an entire enemy battalion. He refused a battlefield commission 4 times, saying he belonged with his men. He is not a janitor. He is a living legend, and you worthless, arrogant children had the unmitigated gall to disrespect him on the floor of the United States Senate. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Peterson's jaw hitting the floor. Colonel Thorne took a deliberate step toward the cadets, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Your names," he commanded. They stammered their names, their voices barely audible. "You will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow morning in full dress uniform," he said. "You will spend the next 6 months studying every after-action report from Sergeant Major Jenkins's unit. You will write a 100-page paper on the meaning of honor, courage, and respect. And you will be fortunate if at the end of that I don't have you drummed out of the service entirely. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wear." He turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He then faced Wayne, his expression softening entirely. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice now filled with warmth and reverence. "It is an honor, sir." Wayne, who had remained at attention, finally relaxed. A small, weary smile touched his lips. He looked at the 3 terrified boys, and for the first time, a hint of pity entered his eyes. "They're just kids, Colonel," he said softly. "Full of fire. Need to be aimed in the right direction is all." He bent down, his movements slow and deliberate, and picked up his broom. "A man's worth ain't in the medals he wears or the rank on his collar," Wayne said, his voice just loud enough for the cadets in the crowd to hear. "It's in the job he does, and doing it right, no matter what it is." He looked at the broom in his hands. "This is my job now, and I aim to do it right." The simple wisdom of his words, delivered without an ounce of anger or resentment, was a far more powerful rebuke than the colonel's fury. It was a lesson in grace from a man who had seen the very worst of humanity and had chosen in the end to be kind. As Wayne spoke, holding the worn wooden handle of his broom, another image flickered behind his eyes. It was the same silver star pin, new and gleaming, being pressed into his hand, not by Sergeant Miller this time, but by a Vietnamese village elder. Wayne's unit had protected the village from a Viet Cong attack, and this was their offering of gratitude. It was a cheap, simple thing, probably bought at a market, but it was all they had. For the soldier with the quiet eyes and the strong heart, the old man had said through a translator. That pin wasn't a military award. It was a reminder of who he had fought for, of the innocent people caught in the crossfire. It was a symbol not of valor in battle, but of the quiet duty to protect those who could not protect themselves. A duty he was, in his own small way, still performing every day. The fallout was swift and decisive. The 3 cadets endured the most grueling 6 months of their young lives under the direct, unforgiving tutelage of Colonel Thorne. They did not get drummed out of the service, but they were forever changed. The arrogance was sandblasted away, replaced by a profound and humbling understanding of the legacy they had sworn to uphold. The incident prompted a formal review at West Point, leading to the creation of a new mandatory course for all first-year cadets, The Legacy of Valor, a history program focused on the stories of enlisted heroes, with the first chapter dedicated to Sergeant Major Wayne Jenkins. The building's administration sent a formal written apology to Wayne, which he accepted with a simple nod before promptly using it to wipe up a small coffee spill. Life for him went on. The floor still needed to be cleaned. About a year later, a young, newly commissioned second lieutenant was walking through the Hart building. He saw the old janitor sweeping the floor. He stopped, his posture straight, his eyes clear. It was Peterson. He waited until Wayne looked up. He didn't speak. He simply rendered a slow, perfect salute, a gesture of profound and earned respect. Wayne stopped his sweeping. He looked at the young officer for a long moment, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The lesson had been learned. The fire had been aimed in the right direction. If you were moved by this story of quiet heroism, please like and share this video. Subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor the heroes who walk among us.